So my name is Shannon CrossBear, and I am being joined by my co-presenters today. I want to welcome everybody into the room and to just take a minute to arrive. You might have joined us a little early and heard us all chatting and getting ready for this opportunity to be with all of you. You might have come from another session. You might have come from lunch. It is lunchtime. We want to be aware of that people have just probably recently eaten, and a lot of times we aren't quite ready to transition to the next thing yet. So let's just take a minute and take a couple of deep breaths and in and out. Get yourselves comfortable so that we can be present for the information that we want to share, and so that we can be present for all of you that have joined us. And we just want to say to begin with that, it's important that we take care of ourselves. And especially when we're talking about things that can be sensitive to our hearts. All of us may have experienced the death of a loved one. Almost everybody will in some point in their lives. And so we just want to know that. So as we kind of go through this information and share with you, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And if you need assistance, then, let us know in the chat. We can, definitely either respond or direct you to someplace else that you could get some assistance. Take care of yourself. Understand, we came together to actually do this presentation because we have experienced, either ourselves or with our loved ones, what dealing with loss can do, and grief and bereavement. And so we, as other family members, came together with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network to really begin to say, what can we do to make it a little bit easier for the ones that are coming behind us? What did we learn through the process? And how do we connect with our partners in the work, for our clinicians, for those that are working in the field of trauma and loss? And how can we do that in a way that will really be a benefit, right? That's what we wanted to do. And so we wanted to, as the National Child Traumatic Stress Network's mission is to really raise the standard of care and improve access to services for traumatized children, their families, and the communities throughout the United States. And so I got the pleasure of working with this team, and I'm going to kind of pass it over for each one of them to introduce very quickly themselves, and we'll come back to that afterwards. Thanks, Sarah. She's ahead of me. Our team is so good that they kind of are like magicians, and that they can read each other's minds when something needs to change. So first I'm going to pass it over to Irwin.
Okay, hi everybody, and welcome, and I'm delighted to be here. I have been working with bereaved families for over 30 years, and I'm really delighted to be part of this group working on the power of parenting, which is an idea I strongly believe in. So let me pass it on to Diane.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for, I had a little echo, but I think we're okay now. Thank you for joining our call. I just wanted to say that in this group, I was selected to be part of the creation of materials on grief and bereavement due to my lived experience. But as was said by Shannon, I think really well, we're all going to face this at some point in our life. And I try to always use the experiences that my son and multiple sons because I did foster care for a long time. Unfortunately, the grief that they suffered and that they went through from the loss of their parents. So I bring that to this work as a foster parent. What I do professionally these days is I'm a trauma coach at University of Massachusetts, where I talk to other foster parents. I'm going to pass it over to Sarah. Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide.
Sure, thanks, Diane. And then after I say my bit, I'll pass it back to you, Shannon, so you can reintroduce yourself, which would be great. I'm Sarah Gardner. I work in Baltimore, Maryland at a place called the Kennedy Krieger Institute. We focus on trauma treatment for children and families. And one of the top 5 traumatic exposures we have here is loss, various forms of it. So I have a clinical background, but I also come to this with a lot of personal interest in traumatic grief associated with sudden losses. And in my future, when I'm not working here anymore, I am hoping to do much, much more with that in my community. I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks, Sarah. So next, will you go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
So I'm going to talk just a minute about who I am, just so I suspect, I haven't looked at the chat box, but I suspect that there's many of you, if you're with the National Federation of Families, that I've either worked with or know through the work that I did with the National Federation. So just a little bit about me. I came to the work as a result of my family, and I worked with the National Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health for 10 years. I love this conference. I am so kind of in shock over the fact that we're not physically together, because it was, out of all the conferences that I've gone to for all the years that I've gone to conferences now, this was my favorite conference. And it was because it was families that came that from all over the country, you know, and we just had that ability to really support each other in sometimes our very challenging lives, right? And so, so I'm so glad to be here, even if it's in that virtual sense, to be here now. And just so a little history, in case people didn't know it, that the National Federation of Families started working with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network very early on, back in 2003, I think, was the first time that we actually formally had a relationship with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, as they embraced and began to elevate family and youth voice at the center of the work that they were doing. So just so you know, I'm coming to you from northern Minnesota. I'm on the homelands of the Ojibwe people. And as you noted, everybody said a little bit about where they were from in our previous slides. So we know we've got some people are responding. It's great that we have some introductions happening in the chat box. And we want to know, just recognize that we have a lot of people in the room. We have a lot of people in the room. And to me, that says that the subject area, even though it's a difficult one, is one that people think is important because they chose to be here, to be in this conversation. So I'm gonna, next slide, please.
Shannon, if I could just say for a second, because I don't know if the rest of the group can see the chat in Huba, but we have people from Oklahoma, Nebraska, St. Louis, Detroit, Michigan, all over the place, all over the country. And feel free to introduce yourselves more in the chat and to share that voice of wisdom, because I do think that we learn from each other. And I'll let you continue on with that, Shannon, but I wanted to let people know wherever they can put the chat, feel free, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. I think, again, I think that speaks to kind of this universal you know, the universal subject area of grief and bereavement, right? So I appreciate that. So we really wanted to, you know, we had this idea that we wanted to really share something that would be short, helpful, allow people to move forward a little, kind of guide. And we wanted to have this desire to really have that wisdom that was born from our experiences, you know, really come through. And understanding there are all kinds of wisdom, not just our wisdom, but the wisdom of our partners with these clinicians that have worked in this field and have been witness to that loss and grief as well. And so there was a work group that got created, and it was supported to really do that, to have a diversity of thought. And from the very, I want to say this because this is so important. From the very beginning, we were in partnership. So we made decisions collectively about what the topics were we were going to address, how we were going to address them, and how we were going to put those words into the hands of those who needed them. Because everybody can produce a product, but if that product stays on the shelf, then it really hasn't met what it needs to do. So next slide, please. So this really was a collaboration between the National Child Traumatic Stress Network with some support from the New York Life Foundation. I mean, those were the supporters that really allowed us the time and space and expertise to kind of move forward, to draw upon these experiences. And certainly those of us that are on this call in this presentation, but also it included Chris Foreman, Julia Kaplow, myself and Sarah, Jill Harrington-Lamore, Jeanette Konowski, Diane, who is here, and of course, Irwin. So we had a whole group, and I just want to acknowledge those that are not physically on this call and their commitment and contribution to the work. So next slide, please. So we really thought, well, what do we want to do today? What are we doing now in this space and this time with all of you? Well, we wanted to really talk about the most important things we've learned about to consider if you're working with a bereaved family. We wanted to highlight, acknowledge, and elevate the power that parents have to actually help children grieve, because when our children are hurting, that's the worst for us, right? We feel so helpless and hopeless when we can't do something to take care of the hurt of our loved ones. And so this really talks to the power of that. Irwin's going to talk more about that in a minute here. We want you to be able to feel comfortable with this little tool, to really be able to use it for yourself, but also to share it with everybody else, and to be able to feel comfortable about recognizing when you might need a little additional help beyond what is available in the tip sheet, and to be able to identify and talk about grief for themselves and for other people in the country, because we know that this is something that we all experience, and yet we are so hesitant to talk about the very thing that is a common denominator for us all. So with that, I'm going to pass it all over to Irwin, who always makes me feel good about the power that I have as a parent. Thanks, Irwin.
Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, let me say, my role in this collaboration, it's been my privilege to participate in this collaboration, in this wonderful group, has been kind of bring in the voice of research and also program development. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background of what we learned from all the research that's been done on bereavement and parents. And I want to start by just talking a little bit about vocabulary, how we refer, the difference between bereavement and grief, just what the words tend to mean as we use them. And generally, the word bereavement refers to the experience of deprivation or loss by death. So anybody who's experienced the death of a loved one is considered bereaved and experiencing bereavement. Grief refers to the response of the person who has lost a loved one. So it could be a psychological or behavioral response. Okay, next slide, please. So why focus on bereavement? I think we all know here from our lived experience and from people we work with how powerful it is and how important it is. Also, the research is more and more conscious of its prevalence. So from a public health point of view, it's the most frequently reported trauma for children who are referred for trauma. It's the most common form of trauma worldwide. And it's the most distressing form of trauma. If you just, ask people about how traumatic the different things they've experienced in their life, in various studies, bereavement would come out probably near the top. And there's a lot of research that said it increases children's risk for problems in development, including persistent grief or depression. Now, I want to put a little caveat on that. When we say it increases children's risk, it doesn't mean that bereaved children don't do well or can't do well. Most bereaved children do well. Risk just means that it increases the likelihood compared to non-bereaved that they're going to experience these problems, and particularly persistent grief. Next slide, please.
I'm going to interrupt you for 2 seconds, Irwin, just because I have to. As a parent, when I first heard you say this, and now this I've heard it many times, but when I first heard you say it was the most common form of bereavement, it made me feel so normal. It made me feel less like, why is this so hard? Why is this happening? And then when I found out I wasn't alone and that it was really common, it was really powerful. And I think that what I would like the audience to hear is that, when I hear from an expert like you, and then I can share all the feelings that were around that, I think that that's what makes us a powerful team. So thank you for continuing to share this information, because I think this information I find it comforting, and I don't know if anybody else does, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, bereavement is something that people generally don't like to talk about, but it's a universal experience. It's something everybody experiences at one point or another in their life. If you have developed loving relationships with people, then you're at risk for bereavement, because everybody dies at one point or another. So most, and this a separate slide for this, but it's worth emphasizing, because grief and bereavement are not disorders. They're a normal life experience. And most children, I focus on children primarily, most children don't develop psychiatric problems. Most bereaved children do fine. Some of them even grow and become kind of develop strengths from their experience. So that's so important to emphasize. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about grief. How do children typically grieve? Well, there's been research on this, and what research finds is there are lots of ways. It's influenced by a lot of factors, and it looks a lot different in a lot of situations. So that's a list of some of the things that have been found to influence the way children grieve. Let me ask Diane to say a couple of words here, because this picture has particular relevance for her family.
Yeah, thank you, Irwin. there was a comment in the chat also about getting feedback. So if there are some people that could mute, maybe that would help, but I apologize if it's me. So in any case, how do children typically grieve? Well, Irwin has this wonderful list of common grief reactions. And then when I went through the list, I said, holy cow, I have to tell you the story of my son, because now I can see where all of these things impacted how he was grieving. So this is actually a picture of my son that I share with permission. And it was right before he was about to have a surgery. A few months before this picture was taken, he had lost his mom. She had overdosed. So he was in foster care. I was his foster mom, and he had been in my care for some time, but I was a substitute caregiver, right? So when we look at these grief reactions, we go, okay, so the relationship with the deceased, it was clearly stressed. He was worried often about the impending overdose. He didn't know at any point in time if he was going to get that phone call. It was obviously a stressful relationship, although he loved his mom dearly. And I did too. When I got the news, I bawled my eyes out. The cause of death matters. The social environment that he was in, who was there to take care of him. I'm a substitute caregiver. What was his developmental like? We know that kids that were in foster care often are behind in schooling and then advanced in other areas. And that was very true for my son too, because in his previous life experience, there were things that he had to do that he shouldn't have had to do at his age. And there were other things that there was no time to spend that time to have a natural development. His culture and religious beliefs that he came from were different than mine. So his family context by nature was also different. So when we talk about a typical grief reaction, you can see just in my son Alex's case, it can be really complicated, and there are a lot of factors. So thank you for sharing that, Irwin.
Next slide, please. Okay. Let's talk about caregiving of a bereaved child and the effect of caregiving or parenting. I come from a research background, so I frankly have reviewed every study I could find on the relationship between parenting and outcomes, well-being of bereaved children. And this little graph on the left just is a pictorial presentation of what we find across studies, and that is with more positive parenting, there are lower levels of child problems of all sorts for bereaved children. So now in the right-hand column, you see the superhero grief. And what I like to think is, kids love books about superheroes. Superheroes are part of our common culture. An interesting observation, if you read comic books, which is a good thing to do, frankly, what you see is a lot of superheroes starts with bereavement. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the research part. I'm going to get to the superheroes in a moment. So I found over 30 scientific studies that look at the quality of parenting and outcomes, including grief of bereaved children. And just to summarize the findings from all this research, and there was all sorts of different kinds of research, everything that follows people from childhood to adulthood. Others just look in a very micro way on the conversations between bereaved children and their caregivers. So it's a wide variety. But to summarize, what they find is higher quality of parenting is related to lower maladaptive grief over time, lower depression and mental health problems, Also on the positive side, higher educational, social, and peer well-being, and even lower biological stress response. It's pretty consistent. Next slide, please.
Irwin, I'm just going to chime in and ask you if you could tell us a little bit about quality of parenting.
Right. I think you're anticipating the next slide.
And I will also go to the next slide.
Oh, okay. You may be right, Sarah. I will talk about it. And next slide talks about the culture. The quality of parenting it's a broad term, and it includes a lot of parenting behaviors, some of which are very directly grief related, like how a parent involves children in funeral and mourning rituals, cultural mourning rituals, starting with the funeral. And there's a number of very good studies on that, and they basically find that there's no single magic bullet. If you want to have a magic bullet, is that to allow the child to do what's in their comfort level, but not to try and keep them out of it because they can't handle it. No, that's not the right way. It's really to work with the child in terms of what's within their comfort level, because mourning rituals are there for a reason, and they're there because they are a way that we gather together to honor our loss. But it also includes conversations, open to conversations with your children, about different aspects of their grief experience, from their feelings to kind of planning how we commemorate the deceased. But it also includes another broad, I don't want to say category, but a broad level of what people do to create what people have called the new normal family. And these are things that are good for any family. There are things like families are a place of where we support each other. They're a place where positive things happen. It's not just a sad place. It's a place where people listen to each other. And one of the most powerful tools, I think, in the power of parenting is listening, the power of listening. It also includes structure. A family has structure, it has rules. And bereaved children, like all children, need rules. They need to be part of the family routine. They need responsibility. They need not to be overwhelmed by their grief or roles that are beyond their capacity. But they're all roles for all children. It's a healthy part of growing up, and bereaved children should not be protected from that. So it's a broad range of things that I would put under the heading of creating the new healthy normal for child development. Because it recognizes it's not the same family as the family before the loved one died. It's not the same. It doesn't mean it can't be healthy and a loving one. All right. So that's the way I think about it. And if you want to read the 35 studies, you can see they all capture some part of that.
Thank you, Irwin, for reading all those studies for us. Should I go to the next?
The next slide, please. Okay, and here's a little snippet from superhero stories. And this is the story of, well, just in the back and the left hand, you see what I said before. Many superhero stories start with the death of their parent. You know, most prototypically, Batman story, Spider-Man story, Superman story, the Black Panther story. And what I like to think of as the hero behind the superhero is the caregiver. The caregiver is the one who helps what becomes the superhero develop into the strong pro-social person who that they grow into. So this is the comic of George and Martha Kent, who parented Superman. Now their test was particularly difficult because Superman, well, he suffered the trauma of the loss of his whole civilization. Both parents who sacrificed themselves to send him because they knew their world was exploding. He was a different species. And he, if you want to get into Superman's story, he had to grapple with being different and figuring out how do you, becoming aware of his superpowers, and then how do you deal with that? And this little from one of his comic books is when he leaves home, and it's kind of what all parents hope to say when their child leaves home is, we gave him what we could, we taught him the best we could, he's ready to go now. And it's a sad time, and I recommend, frankly, to go back and actually read the superhero stories, because there's some very wonderful things that they did that are kind of embedded in the stories. People don't talk about it, but they're the hero behind. If you want to appreciate this, just think of what would have happened if Superman's rocket had landed in the backyard of Lex Luthor. It would have been a whole different story. Similarly with Spider-Man, Batman. Batman's an interesting one because in all these cases, the parent was not the biological parent. Batman, the wisdom comes through his butler, and what his butler does, if you follow the story, is he connects them. He keeps the positive connection or the positive bond with their deceased parent. That's all I want to say about it. But it's a fun literature to get into if you're interested. And it's only comic books. Hey, what could be bad about that? Next slide, please. Okay. This is a little bit, I'm repeating a little bit about what we mean by positive parenting. So we can skip over it because I've already covered this slide. And here I'm repeating, I think, what Diane and Shannon have said. But it's worth saying over and over and over again, positive parenting rests on a foundation of self-care.
Irwin, can I say a few words here, if you don't mind?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of feedback if we are both on, so unfortunately, I think you'll have to mute. But as a caregiver, and especially when I think that I was a substitute caregiver for the boys that I'm thinking of, it was really challenging to, yes, I had stressed myself, and yes, I didn't know how to take care of all of these kids, but I felt like I had to do it all at the beginning, and I was really taking it all on for myself, and I was trying to hold all of their grief, and I realized quickly that I needed the help of others, and maybe I was in a better position as a substitute caregiver. I think that probably if I had been a bio parent, it would have been even more challenging, because I think you put a lot of pressure on yourself as a parent to say, I have to hold this all for my kid, and I have to be strong for my kid. But you actually need to be strong for yourself as well, and then you can be strong for your kid. And that's so hard to do. I was really in a position where I knew I needed other supports. I knew I couldn't be everything for my son, because I knew that he also needed to talk to other people about how I might be different than his mom that he's missing, and why he might be taking some of this out on me, and maybe he had some feelings about, I'm angry with you, why are you here, my real mom isn't, and he needed to be able to say that. So I learned the picture that I showed you with him in the hospital. The reason why I chose that picture was because that grief doesn't just happen right after right? It comes in waves. So a few months go by and he's mostly okay most days. And then something happens and he says, oh, this always happens to me. Bad things always happen to me. And he kind of got stuck in there and I didn't know what to do. So I reached out to his coach and he played football. And I said, can you help me? Because I think he's really stuck. And he's so worried he's never going to play football again. He's never going to be able to get over the death of his mom. I need some help. And his coach did a wonderful job of having a team meeting. And the entire team actually supported this kiddo. And without that coach's support, I don't know how we would have gotten through it, because I couldn't be everything for him and I shouldn't be everything for him. So those parents of you that are out there listening, you know, I hope that you are kind to yourself and give yourself that compassion, because it's really necessary for not just for you, but for your kiddo. So don't feel guilty. I think that's a normal feeling. Maybe Irwin has some papers on that, but I know that as a parent, I would often feel guilty if I did something for myself, which in reality, I needed to reframe that so that I was doing it for both of us. I'll stop there and mute myself, Irwin.
I'm gonna unmute myself because I want to jump in here because I think this is too important to not jump in. And the reason that I'm saying that is that we have a lot of people. I've looked at the chat. We have people in the chat that are experiencing grief, and not only for their children, but for themselves at the same time. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was just recognize how we have to hold the parenting role and our grief at the same time, and what that means and how we need extra care for that. So in my situation, I had both. I had my children's bio father had passed away. That was one experience where I was needing to parent in a grief situation. And then I had to parent as a mother of a child who lost a child that had siblings. And so the depth of my grief while navigating their grief and giving space to both was a very challenging thing for me. And for anybody, for any human being, that's a lot to carry and hold. And so this idea of caregivers taking care of themselves. And I think that so many times, whether it's in a presentation, whether it's at our workplaces, when we have these discussions about taking care of ourselves, they're usually at the end. They're like the last presentation instead of the foundational presentation as we go into this to think about that. So, and sometimes, you know, for my life, it's been the kind of the very basic. It's been, you know, some days it's enough to chop wood and haul water. I heard a saying the other day that was shared and I loved it because it said, the saying is, yard by yard, life is hard. Inch by inch, life's a cinch. And so sometimes it's simply the first medicine, drinking water, just being. So so thanks for allowing me to share that, because I just want to be sensitive to those that have self-disclosed in the chat about the situations that they're going through that speak to this very issue about how do you parent when you're dealing with your own grief. So thanks, Irwin. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks both Shannon and Diane. You said it all. I mean, we use, in the work that my group has done, we use the concept of self-compassion. And self-compassion is a skill. It's not something you can just say, have self-compassion. You have to practice it. And you're going to find many times that it's hard. it's hard to be good to yourself. Think about that. It takes work to be good to yourself, to be kind to yourself. But that's okay. Inch by inch, as Shannon said. I really love that saying. And the other part that's helpful, and I think Diane brought it up before, is you're not alone. And that's one of the really difficult things about grief, and there are a lot of cultures help to counteract, is the sense that people don't like to talk about it. It's like it's contagious. But everybody experiences it. That's so weird. So it's important for people to appreciate that this is just part of being a human being, and particularly being a loving human being. So next slide, please. Okay, so I want to come back to what I see as one of the key parts of positive parenting, and that is listening. We talk a lot about what should I say in this situation? What should I say in that situation? What should I tell my children about a suicide or about a death from an overdose? That's important because it's something that actually inhibits you from listening, because I don't know what to say. But what at the end of the day, if you will, is key and can't get lost is the power of listening. What you're really going for is to have a conversation in which the child talks and feels like they can share with the parent. And that can be whatever, their memories of the deceased, their commemorations, their grief feelings on a given morning or day, or something that happened that triggered to it. It's all permissible, and the parent or caregiver does not have to be a biological parent, certainly. The caregiver develops a habit of listening and shows that they're there to listen. And, you know, Shannon and Diane talked about a parent grieving themselves. Well, sometimes the child's going to see the parent grieving. They're going to see the parent crying or sad or having a bad day. And that's okay to share with the child without overwhelming them. And the way we teach not to overwhelm them is to acknowledge, yeah, I'm sad because dad or mom or grandpa died. And sometimes I cry, but we're going to be okay. You know, this is normal, but we're going to be okay. Next slide, please. All right, so it's nice to say listening is important, but listening can be hard and it can be scary. And there's lots of reasons for that. What if I don't know what to say? There's actually been research on that. And that's the main one that comes up, why people don't listen, is I don't know what to say. And what if my child becomes emotional? What if I lose it and scare my child? Will talking make it worse? It's a very common myth. I don't know what to do. You know, why do I have to do this? So these are things that make it hard. And this is exactly the reason, because it's hard, is exactly the reason that we developed the Power of Parenting tip sheets. So with that, let me transition to, I think it's Sarah, talking about the tip sheets.
Yes, thank you so much, Irwin, and thanks to all the discussion and chat that got us to this point. I can see in the chat that there's a lot of interest in how to do some of this. And I love what you said, Irwin. People, when listening is probably the most important thing you can do, but then those conversations happen because you don't know what to say. And listening and speaking are actually two different behaviors, but you can see how they're so linked when you're trying to be a parent. under tough circumstances. So we're about to enter the part of this conversation where we're going to focus on these tip sheets that we promised to talk about. And first, what I want to say is that we have created a bunch of them, and I'm going to just give a quick intro to them. And I'm going to speak to why we created these. Now, you already know that we came together as parents with experience and as people who have done clinical work to try to provide something that would support families in a tailored way. So we didn't want our materials to be too general. So you'll see that each one of these has its own focus, and that we're trying to give a unique response to particular situations, because we're saying it's universal, and it is. Everyone's going to have loss, unfortunately. We haven't talked about pets yet, but pet loss is awful. Maybe that's going to be a tip sheet at some point. I don't know. So we know it's universal, but we want to give a unique response. And we also wanted to make sure for each of these, we brought in the voice of people who have been through this experience in one way or another. That's why we have lots of quotes in these tip sheets, which you're going to see. And you'll see that each one speaks to a particular issue. You're also going to see that they have kind of common elements throughout. So as we've developed this series, we've tried to keep some consistent things running through each of these so that they kind of hang together in a recognizable way. And I think it's also important to mention that, as Shannon said before, we want them to be easy to access so that they will be used rather than getting stuck collecting dust somewhere on a shelf. I should also mention that we're going to be going into breakouts soon for about 25 minutes. We have 3 breakouts. You've been assigned to them randomly by a machine or some software. One breakout is going to be about this first one, which is how to help your child after the death of a sibling from substance abuse or overdose. And we felt a lot of urgency to get this one written because of everything going on with the opioid crisis in the United States of America. And Shannon talked about sibling losses, and that's huge. And so this one kind of combines the sibling idea with the opioid idea. And of course, you're the parent dealing with this situation. So that's the first one. That'll be one breakout group. I'm going to keep going and introduce these. The other thing I want to mention is that when you're in your breakout groups, we're going to put links to each of these in the chat so you can open them up and look at them yourself. So here comes the second one. This is the one about how to help your child after a parent or caregiver dies. Now, this one's more general. This does not assume a particular way of dying. This just really puts forward the idea of what can you do when, say, you're the surviving caregiver or the substitute caregiver, as is the case in Diane's situation. And it's this whole thing of, where do you even begin when there's so much emotion that's raw to be in those conversations with your kids, the whole business about how to take care of yourself, etc. So that's the second one that we did, and that's going to be managed by Irwin and Diane. The opioid one is going to be managed by Shannon. And then I'm going to keep this brief because I want to make sure that I leave a good amount of space for these conversations. The third breakout room has 3 tip sheets in it. Now, again, I said that we try to respond as a group when we're making these decisions to what the needs are. So we come together and say, what should we do next? And, you know, last year, we were all thinking a lot about COVID. So very quickly, we put together 3 tip sheets that are COVID related. And I'm going to try to address those in the breakout group, share them and talk with you about them in that breakout group. Quickly, they cover mourning the death of a loved one in the pandemic. We all know that death and dying in a pandemic is different than the way it used to be. And then addressing fears and feelings from prior losses. We've got kids and families who are entering the pandemic already with plenty of terrible loss they're living with on a day-to-day basis. And then this piles on. And then the third one is how to help kids cope when somebody is dying. They haven't died yet, but you know, there's hospitalization, etc. So that's a special, unique situation that's very challenging. So that is your introduction to all 5 of them, covered in 3 rooms. The goal is 25 minutes on these. I think we're going to be okay with coming back. And so after those 25-minute conversations, my instruction to give you is, I wrote it down. I hope don't leave the meeting, leave the breakout room. Don't say goodbye to this meeting, press the button for leave the breakout room after 25 minutes. And then we can probably have about 5 minutes for Shannon to help us wrap it up. I think my math is right, more or less, maybe 10. Now, I think somehow magically we're going to be in breakout rooms. I don't know if I have to press a button. I think maybe we have a conference person who's helping us with this.
Hi, Sarah, you're the host. And so you have to control it. If you go down to where it says breakout rooms, I believe you just press enter or join.
Sarah, I've got it. I'll do it
Excellent.
now.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
3
this.
breakout rooms starting now.
Excellent. And 25 minutes, we'll be back.
Sarah, Irwin, what's you
Lots of
good?
things have happened. Let's get good. Irwin needs to leave. If this is room 3, I think Irwin needs to leave this room and get him into room 2 where Diane is with a group of people, which I just got put into and spent some time with.
All right. And Sarah, what group are you supposed to be in?
I'm supposed to be in 3 on the COVID. And then if the other thing I wanted to wonder is if we have a reasonable amount of people in each group, because I have no sense of our total.
You seem to have an average amount in each. Sarah, which room did you want to go into?
I think I'm supposed to be leading number 3, which is the COVID one.
All right, hold on.
But I visited 2 already. And there's Irwin. We need him with Diane in 2.
Okay, you're in number 3 now.
Thank you. So I'll go join number 3.
Put me in 2, please.
All right, let me see where you are. All right, okay.
Right now I'm in 3.
You're in 2 now.
All right, I'm going to join.
Everyone needs to join when requested. There's a lot of people who haven't joined yet.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. That's the part that I'm not quite figuring out so well, is how to move people who maybe have stepped away from their computers or
Yeah,
maybe hit the wrong button.
They have to accept on their own. We have 2 people, Christina and Sonia in room 3 need to accept. Wanda in room 2 needs to accept, and Nicole and Mandy in room 1. And after that, everybody's moved. So we have about 5 people that are wandering. I think you should just start.
Yeah, are you going to stay here, Gail? Because then I'll go jump a break.
I
join a
will.
break.
I'll stay here.
Thank you so much.
Where do I find where they requested
What do you mean?
to join the group? I'm not seeing it.
All right, who are you? I can't see who
Mandy.
you. Mandy, okay. Mandy, you're in group 1.
Okay. And I'm on my phone and I don't see where it says
Oh, yeah,
join.
I see how that is. I don't know how to, hold on, let me see if I can do this. Mandy, I don't know how to move you on your phone.
Me neither.
Uh-oh, you might be with me. Yeah, I don't know how to move you on your phone.
Let me play with it and see if I can figure it out.
You're in room 1, so if you could figure that out, that would be great.
Okay.
Carrie, you're in room 1, if you can hear me and if you could accept. Wanda, you're in room 2, if you can hear me and you can accept. Christina and Sonia, you're in room 3, if you can hear me and accept.
Wow, welcome back, everybody. I don't know about other folks in their rooms, but it was a little difficult to tear ourselves away in the middle of, you know, what really says to us what we already know. We do not give ourselves enough space to have these very important, critical conversations around something that we all experience in life. Just we're going to give a few minutes. I'm going to change my view. So can we take this down just for a minute?
Yes, I was hoping to get confirmation that I'm even sharing screen. What do you see right now, Shannon?
I see the last slide.
Okay, so how about if I stop share?
That would be great. Yeah.
Sure.
Now I thank you. I get to see all these, actually be in this virtual room with all these faces, and we have a couple on my view. I have a couple of pages of folks. So I will try to monitor as best I can. But I just want to do a kind of what I would call a popcorn. And the question that I have to everybody is, you know, how did this land with you in terms of meaning, you know, how does it feel to have a tip sheet? Is this a good idea? Do you find it useful? We asked this question in our group. We had a couple of respondents that said, yes, it is helpful. So let's just hear if anybody wants to share anything that happened or in their group or that they would like to bring back to the larger group about the conversations that they had. Any thoughts you have on the tip sheets? And all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Beverly. So we were able to get various tips on kind of like a reaction to a response type. If this happens and if this happens, this is what you say, this is what you can do. Give different ways to redirect emotions or help them get through those feelings in that time. So that was very helpful. I'm gonna be so excited to just look over these tip sheets and just push those nuggets on out there to help support parents, to help their youth, and also to help my own family as well.
Thanks, Beverly.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I'm Julia. I was in Sharon's group, and I was just sharing that you know, I had like 3 or 4 pages of notes, and I just stumbled across the training. And when I seen the title, it just jumped out at me because I am a family support partner, and I have a family that's dealing with grief on so many different levels. And I really want to take this information and digest it and regurgitate, you know, when I go back and share with my family, not just the families that I'm dealing with, my personal families, myself, you know, learning that, you know, how you grieve is important, you know, that we do it properly and that it's okay, you know, to take time. I like what you said about inch by inch, life's a cinch, and, you know, yard by yard, life is hard. And it doesn't have to be that way. We're not alone. So it's empowering. I'm just so grateful that I was supposed to be in another room, but I really was supposed to be here. So I thank you for everyone for sharing. Knowledge is power, and I'm definitely going to take this back and make a difference in, you know, the families that I'm working with, my own personal family and my community. So thank you.
Thank you, Julia, very much. So, you know, so we had a couple of questions. We're not only coming to you with the tip sheets about what we're offering, but we're also really interested in how do we best get these 2 things. How do we best get these in the hands of other family members that may need them, or those that work with families? And then the second one is, we're not done. We have been really concentrating on, you know, as things came up, like we responded to COVID because we knew there were some very specific things that needed to be said that could be helpful. The same thing with homicide. We're working on one now, and we've had suicide. And we know that in this room, you know, most of us get to places in the family movement because of pain. We stay here because we have passion about what we want to do for other family members and for our own families and our communities. And so, so we really would invite you to connect so that if your voices of experience can come through, that as we develop additional tip sheets, that we have more family voices to draw upon, more experience, more wisdom, more ideas that in this power of parent, because we really believe in the power of that collective wisdom in terms of our experience and our learning and bringing them together to help others. And Irwin with his research really gives us kind of that backing that we have, that what we think is true is generally right on, you know, and that, you know, we're sometimes it doesn't matter that we know the right thing to say, but just that we're there, like I said, that we're present in whatever way we can be. So,
Shannon?
Yes.
I just wanted to be mindful of the questions that were in the Whova chat. And we addressed, I think, the first one that says, what are some things you can do to ease the grieving process? And we talked really about having open doors for listening and being present. And there are other tips in the tip sheets. And we'd love to hear more tips from everybody else as well. The next question was, do you have any tools that you use with families after the loss of a loved one? And I would just like to say, personally, I actually use these handouts myself to start a conversation with teenagers, because I found, you know, I think it's hard to talk about grief regardless, but teenagers in general sometimes want to hide in their room and not want to talk to you. And how are you going to get them to open up? And for me, maybe it was just my own comfort, but I was happy to have something in my hand to say, hey, you know, here's this. I don't know what you think of it, but maybe when you get a chance, if you could read it and let me know. And sometimes, I think it was 3 months or maybe 4 months later, my son said, oh yeah, the thing you gave me was really dope. So they do sometimes listen, but maybe not right at the time that we were wanting to talk about it. So if that helps, if you have any other tools, I think that we as parents always share what we have with each other. I think that's by our nature. And so we're certainly not the only experts on this. And, you know, feel free to share in the chat too, if you have other resources you would find helpful. And then the last question was, what do you do when siblings are separated from each other after the death of one parent? And that is a really hard and a very specific question. And I certainly don't know the answer. What do you do when siblings are separated from each other after the death of one of the parents? So I don't know if any of the other panelists want to take a stab at that, but I found that to be a great question, Wayne.
I mean, I'll jump in a little bit, but it's not the end of the conversation. It's more like the beginning of the conversation. You know, as with grief in general, one of the most important things is about keeping things predictable and having some routine and sense of control. So if siblings are separated temporarily, or perhaps on what's going to be a more ongoing basis, the kids, depending on their ages, need to be informed that, you know, the adults are working together, care about their best interests, are going to prioritize visits and contact face-to-face and through any other methods, and that as much as possible, the kids, depending on their ages, should be given some control over when and how these relationships are maintained. So it's more like themes than actual tips. You know, control, routine, reassurance, and demonstrating that the adults know how important these relationships are, and this separation may have to occur right now for whatever reasons, but it doesn't mean we don't know you love each other, and we want to try it. We're going to support and show you that we're trying to provide contact for you. Other panelists may have things to say too, but that's a tough one.
Yeah, I would just
Go ahead, Irwin.
Sarah, I think what you said was very wise. I would just add, usually if siblings are separated after the death of a parent, it's for practical and logistical reasons, that the caregiving or the new family situation, this is capacity, that somebody can only take one child and somebody else can only take another child, and it's not something that anybody wants particularly or even thinks is optimal particularly, but everybody kind of recognizes it as a problem. But it's a problem that hopefully if people are working together, and I'd underline that, if people are working together and if they put the problem on the table, that, yeah, it's really sad that you can't really live together now, but deal with it as a group problem of how do we keep, you connected, and, deal with it as a family problem. So the worst thing is, to pretend it doesn't exist, to pretend it's not a problem, because it is. But it's not one, if you label it as a problem, you both labeled it, which is important. The kids feel heard. And problem means something we can work on.
Irwin, I was thinking about, as a foster parent, kids were always separated. It was rare for me to have an entire family group. And so when a bereavement, when grief happened afterwards, it was like they felt sadness upon sadness. And I love the comment Chris Foreman put in the chat about the term traumatic separation, because I do think that sometimes when we layer these traumas, it can become very overwhelming for the child and for the family. And not every caregiver is going to be equal in their capacity to support the children. I know for my son, Alex, I had his siblings over a lot more after that because grandma was overwhelmed. And so I think finding out how you can maybe use the best resources, the use of resources in the family as well, is really critical to support each other as adults.
Okay. Sarah, would you put up our last slide? And I want to bring us home because I want to respect people's time. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for attending and for coming. And if you didn't get a chance and wanted to voice something, let's find another opportunity to have that happen. So I think the last slide was really about the call to action, which is, getting these tip sheets out where you can, helping us to determine best places, and to think about how you might contribute to a future tip sheet, if that would be something you would want to do or be willing to do. So I love to end it with, the first thing I love this came from the Educational Little Tree, and Little Tree is talking to his grandma, and his grandma says, the first thing you do when you find something good is to share it, because you don't know how far the good will go. And so that's what we hope that we had an opportunity to do today, to be able to share something that was good for all of you and to continue to do well. So take care. We're so glad that you're here with us. And remember, we can all do better at talking about loss and grief, because it's something we all have. Thank you.